the fact that Shopify exists and has such a huge distribution allowed us to create a tool that allows brands and partners to execute experimentation in a fraction of the resources.
You're listening to Inside Commerce, a weekly e-com strategy, technology and CX focused podcast hosted by experienced digital consultants and re-platform specialists James Gedd and Paul Rogers. Get insights into e-com strategy of leading brands, hear from industry thought leaders and leading tech vendors with practical advice to help you improve your online CX. This episode is sponsored by Shopify. We're looking at a really important topic today. It's around conversion rate optimization for Shopify brands, segmentation, personalisation and testing with two highly experienced guests who will be able to give you a massive amount of practical real world insights from their expertise. So a warm welcome. Let's do it one by one so we don't confuse you both about talking over each other. But first, a warm welcome to Anya, who's Visually co-founder and CEO. Hey, Anya.
Hi, James. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Welcome Tel Aviv today, so you're warmer than anyone listening in Europe. Well, in our part, anyway. And also to Nick, who's a CRO lead at Vervaunt. Hi, Nick. How you doing?
Hey, very good. Thank you.
Yeah, good. Thanks. Thank you for joining us. Really looking forward to this today. I know that you guys have worked on lots of different businesses, projects, and got lots of different perspectives of this. So let's start with a bit of background and introduction. So Nick, do you want to start and give people a flavour for who you are, what you do, what sort of projects you work on?
Sure. Yeah. So as you said, I'm CRO lead at Vervaunt. I've been here. In fact, it was my year anniversary yesterday at Vervaunt, but I've made it. But I've been in the world of kind of UX and CRO for over 10 years, worked across loads of different businesses from B2B, more recently so pushing into e-commerce, which I personally find the most interesting. I think there's lots more movement there. But yeah, always been agency side, came into Vervaunt to kind of build the CRO service, introduced to Anya at Visually, which has been game changing, which I'm sure we'll come on to a little bit later. But I'm kind of working on a bit of everything. So I work across the full spectrum of CRO. So everything from the customer research through to ideation, design, test development and analysis. And then obviously program management that sits within that and all the kind of client facing pieces too. So I've been doing that particular role for probably 5 or 6 years now. And now I'm starting to just try and build out the team here. But yeah, really looking forward to getting into this subject. Very happy to have Anya here alongside me because we work really closely together. So yeah, I'm excited to get into it.
Yeah, amazing. Really looking forward to it. I like the fact you teased out all the different areas, CRO, because I think sometimes people think of it as the tests that are executed.
Yeah.
And don't spend so much time on how much insight and research analysis needs to go in order to drive effective experimentation. So looking forward to teasing out all of those elements. So Anya, so by way of introduction to people listening, some people have heard of Visually, some people will know you, others won't. You grew up in the CRO world. So let's do an introduction to who you are and your background, but also what you've learned from running experimentation for a large retailer that then led you to building Visually.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So I've been in e-commerce for more than 16 years, most on brand side, where I scale D2Cs from 1 to 100 million. One of the largest brands I worked for 7 years and was their senior VP of product and data. We actually really doubled down on experimentation and we ran close to 1,000 tests annually. So that led us to increase our per session value in over 100% annually. And that led Meta to invite me to talk about how we did that. I used to give talks at Meta to other brands. And then with time, brands would come up to me saying, nice examples. I used to kind of show personalizations and tests. But how do we do this? And for me, back in the day, it was kind of obvious. We had close to 100 developers and 15 people on product and data. So we had huge teams behind it. But what I realized that the brands that are on Shopify, they don't have these huge technical teams. And sometimes they are, 8-figure brands and they don't even have one developer in-house, right? So I was trying to research for something like Klaviyo for onsite. So basically an experimentation personalization tool that will be platform to platform. And we didn't find anything. And that's how I crossed sides to B2B. And that's how we created Visually.
Amazing. And I think this is really interesting because a lot of people listen on brand side. One of the key questions they have, I guess, of consultants like us, technology founders is what knowledge and understanding do they have of the mechanics and the challenges that brands go through on a day-to-day basis that impact their ability to execute. So it's really good that we've got those perspectives as well as the execution side of it. So let's start. So we're focusing in on, I know that Visually's focusing on the Shopify community, and Nick, I know that Vervaunt work with a vast range of predominantly premium brands in that space as well. So we start a bit of platform centric, and then we get more broader strategic. But so Anya, I've heard other people in the past say, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong, that it's hard to do meaningful A/B testing, for example, on Shopify due to platform constraints, due to the way that the technology third parties integrate. How would you answer this objection? How is it possible to do it meaningfully and to get good tests executed, given the fact that you can't just do anything you want on a platform that's managed by a SaaS vendor?
Yeah, that's a great question. Except for one area, which is the checkout, and is obviously a lot more limited in Shopify, although Visually does integrate to checkout extensibility, and one is of the only tools that does that. Except the checkout, I think it's really the other way around. I mean, the fact that Shopify exists and has such a huge distribution allowed us to create a tool that allows brands and partners to execute experimentation in a fraction of the resources. And I'll give a very, very specific example. So let's say that you're an e-commerce manager and an apparel brand, right? And you woke up one day wanting to test what happens if you emphasize your free returns policy on your cart drawer, right? So what do you usually need to happen? And I know because I used to write those Jira tickets when I was brand side. So one, you need the developer to add that text, right, to your cart. Then two, you can't really show it to all carts because some carts, right, contain products that are final clearance and are not eligible, right? So your developer needs to make sure that they understand the content of the cart, right? And kind of customize it accordingly. And then three, it makes sense that it will increase your conversion rate in a substantial way. But what will happen to your returns? Maybe it will also increase your returns, right? And therefore, your profitability will decrease. So now you need to find a way to get your returns data to your experimentation platform, right? And you also need, maybe a developer or an analyst to do that afterwards, right? So that was kind of prior to Shopify and Visually. Now you can wake up one day as an e-commerce manager and not having any experimentation platform, not having any technical background whatsoever, and to have this test live on air in an hour, right? Because adding the text to your cart drawer is maybe as simple as writing an email, right? And then two, Visually, thanks to the deep integration to Shopify, understands the content and the dynamic content of the carts and understand how your catalog is structured, so it understands if it's final clearance or not, right? And then lastly, we pull all the data, right, from Shopify natively. So you have returns, profitability, subscription rate, all out of the box with just one simple install. So as I see it, it's kind of the other way around.
What do Mattel, Victoria Beckham, Sennheiser, and Glossier all have in common? They power their businesses with Shopify. Shopify is the most innovative and scaled commerce platform on the planet. It also happens to have the best converting checkout on the planet. Shopify, powering the future of enterprise commerce. Find out more at shopify.com/enterprise.
So I guess this is, I mean, it's always worth teasing this out, is one of the challenges to brands is making sure that they have storefronts set up properly and data connections and integrations, right? So that the third-party platforms can pull this data. And I have this in discovery a lot of time when people de-scope things saying, oh, it's not critical, we don't need that data in. And then you realize that later on, it actually impacts your ability to do programs like this. So I think that's an important thing for people listening is if you want to take experimentation seriously, you've really got to get those robust integrations from other third parties to get data into your ecom platform in the first place. So I think thank you for giving a really tangible example, because that was going to be my next question was, can you give me an example of one of the ways that you did it? So you've already done that, which is amazing. And Nick, let's talk about that. Let's put a commercial lens on this. You advise a lot of different brands on this. And I know Paul and you talk about this a lot. I've talked about a lot with Paul and other people is the way that people measure CRO varies quite significantly. So in terms of KPIs and success criteria, where do you think people go wrong? How can that impact? And what for you is a sensible way to measure the outcomes of testing?
Yeah, so it's a common question. And I think it's probably very misleading down to the name of the service, Conversion Rate Optimisation. Like it narrows down everything that we do. And I think that when people think, right, we're here to optimize conversion rate, they think of that one metric and that's all they're looking at. We all know sitting on this call and plenty of people listening will know as well that conversion rate as a figure is a pretty flawed metric. It's kind of become a bit of a proxy for UX, but it's impacted by so many different factors that if you ever look at like a daily trend line of conversion rate, it's all over the place. So trying to use that as a single KPI just is never going to work. Like even if you have like a massive lift from a test and you look at that trend line over 12 months, you won't see it on there at all. So looking at that in isolation across 12 months, for example, is just, it's not going to give you the results you want. So what we tend to do is we'll look at the kind of cumulative potential of each test that we run. So every time we run a test, we produce a report. And in that report is a potential monthly revenue contribution. Hopefully they're all uplifts and that looks great. Now, a test is obviously run in a very short window, 2 to 4 weeks. And you're looking at the revenue increase in that particular period. So you're looking at a real small slice of time, really specific slice of time as well. So to just go, well, my monthly contribution is, let's say 10 grand, but just times it by 12. Surely that's my ROI done. That would be the dream, obviously. But seasonal impact, economic changes, all of these things kind of like have an impact. So what we tend to do is we look at that monthly figure for the test that we ran. We then extrapolate that out, but then we make a few adjustments. So we'll adjust for things like even intangible things like the fact that you've added a new feature to a site. There's like a novelty effect, right? When something new goes live on a site, maybe someone's never seen it before. That spike at the beginning when you ran that test might be really high, but then over time that's going to drop off. So make an adjustment for that kind of novelty effect decay. There's also like the reality of implementation. So you might run the test and it looks like this, but then maybe that's an MVP version, or maybe it didn't quite translate to the production development. So there's a little bit of adjustment made there. Seasonal and market variability, that's quite a big adjustment. And then there's a bit of buffer in there for any external factors. So it's quite long-winded, but when you've got the kind of rough formula to work it out, you can quite quickly get to an ROI figure quite easily. And commercial leaders, all they want to see is pounds and pence, right? They want to see that revenue contribution and the impact that your testing program is having. And I think that's probably the easiest way to run it. Alongside that, we'll look at things like the volume of tests that we're running, our win percentage, and what we've learned from each test as well. So building a bit of a library of learning. So any of those losing tests still deliver value to the program. Commercial leaders don't tend to really care about that stuff because they're thinking about, right, I'm spending X, I'm getting Y back. So I think that hopefully answers that commercial question. But yeah, we're essentially looking at revenue contribution over time.
I like the fact you flagged the instability piece, because I think this is really important, is not seeing the impact of testing as purely short term and monitoring those cohorts. Because you're right, when something gets into production, it can behave it differently. You have all these other impacts that what made the test successful in the first place might then change over time. And the reality that, I mean, this is what I love about testing, is what might be right today could be wrong in 6 months.
Yeah.
And we might need a new version of that test to then find a better treatment, and actually a positive result could end up negative based on some other factor. And you can't predict 100% where that goes if you're not tracking that data long term. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, and I think it's important as well. Like you touched on it then. There's this, you're kind of layering everything, right? So every time you get an uplift, that's your new baseline, and you're trying layering things on top. But over time, they sort of come down. So you need to keep layering up. Otherwise, you're just going to end up flat again. And typically, if you look at like a trend line, if it's trending down and you start doing testing, it's still going to trend down, but it might trend down less.
Yeah.
So it's that adding that compounding value as well, and responding to expectations that usually set up. ChatGPT probably being like the biggest, and AI in general like being the biggest kind of factor. I know we're going to come on to that a little bit later, but
yeah, it's not a pod without an AI question, is it, these days?
Yeah.
Anya, an area of capability I'd like to get into a bit more with you originally is around like segmentation, personalisation, because by default, out the box, none of the SaaS vendors do strong segmentation, personalisation, and I think a lot of the time tests are done to everybody. So I'd love to know, like, how do these two come together? How does Visually enable this? And could you give us some examples so people got like a tangible of what is possible in terms of targeting specific segments or personalized testing?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, I think I definitely agree with Nick when it comes to, the acronym CRO. I don't think that there's a single person that is actually practicing this that likes the term conversion rate optimization, because it is usually used to describe the act of digital experience optimization or management, right? But it just didn't catch as well as a CRO, I guess. And when we think about kind of the digital experience optimization in a broader way, A/B testing is just one tool, right? It's a tool to just validate our hypothesis, our predictions, but continuous experience optimization requires something a little more broad. As you said, segmentation, personalization. Just as you wouldn't send the same email to someone who just entered your store for the first time, right? Versus someone who bought 5 times, your site should not show the same content, the same navigations, and so on. So basically, and I would just say that kind of prior to my Shopify days, right? Usually experimentation platforms were digital experience platforms, and they actually did have the components of A/B testing, audience management and segmentation, and merchandising, right? All in one platform, right? And that kind of changed in Shopify. And when we came to this space, we saw kind of disconnected apps that only do upsells, right? Or only do product recommendations, or only add this. And usually merchants wouldn't even test how these things actually impact, right? So if you would add upsells to your cart, right, and that upsell tool would actually report on huge numbers of attributed revenue, the actual scenario would probably could be very different. So for example, if I was in the cart with $100 black t-shirt, right, and the upsell algorithm would have suggested a $50 black t-shirt, and let's say that I would actually click on that, because there was no A/B testing, the revenue would attribute to the fact that I actually clicked on an upsell rather than the decrease that would have created in my business. So that was the space kind of when we entered that. So what I'm saying is that these three elements of experience management within e-commerce are critical for good experimentation execution. So for some examples, we work with a 9-figure brand, Faherty, from the States. They added 6% in conversion rate by personalizing their homepage based on the shopper's behavior. So emphasizing women's items to shoppers that only showed interest in women's wear. As simple as that, right? Mm-hmm. So basically, visually, they can create audiences based on anonymous real-time user behavior, and then create experiences and A/B test them, right? First, that are personalized to these audiences. Branch, an 8 or 9-figure, I'm not sure, furniture brand, added 9% to their conversion rate by showcasing specific products only for returning shoppers. So furniture is kind of a long consideration. The beginning, it's more of a discovery phase. So there's no real reason to show specific products. You kind of want them to explore categories more. So doing that, new versus returning, we see a lot of that doing really great work. Another brand, 9-figure brand, makeup brand, Merit Beauty, tested adding something they call the Australian set to their Australian market and increased 18% in conversion rate to that market in the process. So just a few examples, very straightforward things that if we think about, email marketing or ads are kind of the bread and butter, but are still not done as much on site.
And I have interest from a technology point of view, because in order to drive those personalizations, you need to have information about the user, you need to have the product knowledge, and you need to be able to serve the correct products. So basically, what other tech is being used? How much of that is visually doing it and taking data from Shopify? I think it'd be useful for people listening to know how the data has been analyzed to send the content back to Shopify.
Yeah. So basically, we pull data from Shopify, but we also pull data from Meta. So we have a native integration to Meta, right? And we also take data from the user real-time session. We do this anonymously so that we can also help our brands to personalize real-time, right? And of course, not all shoppers are logged in, which is most of the data you can bring from Shopify. And you said very correctly that we definitely kind of connect the data we have about the user, whether logged in or not, the catalog, right? And how the site is actually built and how the user is interacting with it. And by having all the data together, we're able to facilitate very robust personalization experiences.
And Nick, I know Paul said that you guys have had lots of debates around like the benefits of different types of segments, like volume versus value. How you cut up audiences into meaningful segments to help drive like personalization and testing. Can you talk people through what is a good approach here? What's a good strategy, and how does it vary from brand to brand? Because it will vary depending on the size and the type of business.
Yeah, definitely. I think the way that I view this is that if you're just getting started with a CRO program, I think you want to aim for velocity and volume. So you want to get as many tests out as you can to prove that program value quickly. You're probably likely to find quite a few quick wins in the early stages that are valuable across the site to all users. So, fixing UX problems, highlighting information that's maybe buried below folds and things like that. So there's probably like a really nice place to start where you're just thrashing out lots of fairly simple tests. Not only are you going to get value from those individual tests, but you're starting to understand and learn what sort of the anatomy of an A/B test looks like. What resources do you need? What reporting is missing? What tags are broken? So you're kind of doing that troubleshooting while adding value with the testing program. So early on, I'd say, focus on volume, and then start to introduce kind of simple segments early. So, it could be as basic as new versus returning users, and Anya touched on a couple of these already. Like, if the returning user homepage, maybe they've abandoned cart, let's get them back into that cart journey when they come back to the site. So there's some fairly like easy segments that you can start to leverage quite quickly. And I will say, like, having used lots of different A/B testing platforms, and I'm not just saying this because Anya's here, but the way that visually handles that audience segmentation and gives you access to create audiences on the fly really quickly is just so simply designed and easy to interact with. So I think there's no reason why you couldn't, in your first tranche of testing, in the first 6 months, start to explore segmentation. What I would say is that typically more mature businesses are set up to handle that segmentation better because they understand their audiences a bit better. They've maybe got more resources to be able to dedicate time to creating bespoke assets. So, like if you think you're segmenting your homepage for 10 different audience segments, that's potentially 10 banners, 10 promotions, 10 lots of product recommendations, like lots of different things that need to go into that. And I think if you're just getting started with testing, that could be quite overwhelming, which is why I say, start with the basic stuff and then build up to that segmentation.
Yeah, I was going to actually a question probably Vanya then on resource, because I always find this. I worked with a big B2B, US B2B brand last year who were wanting to drive lots of personalisation of content. And then the question always comes, okay, so you want 12 segments and you want to completely personalise the homepage and there's 8 different content layouts. That's 96 bits of content instead of 12. Who's creating that? What is about? And if you're using AI, what's the governance process to ensure that it stays on? So I'd love to know what is that process within visually? Are do people set up and create those different assets for the different segments of the test in visually? Do you then connect with like third-party CMSs where people might already be creating different content for multiple segments? Like what is that connectivity there from a resource and asset point of view?
Yeah, that's a great question. So currently, the way that it works is that they actually create those experiences within visually. And one thing that I believe that AI will definitely change dramatically, right, is our ability to cater very granular personalized experiences. And the reason is that instead of us having to actually create, right, all of those assets, right, AI will be able to actually execute on creating, and then humans will be able to decide, right, which variants are aligned with the brand, right, are approved, are the right thing strategically, and then kind of go on. And that's I think that's one of the main points when it comes to AI and on-site experience in the upcoming years.
Nick, one of the for somebody who's obviously working with lots of different brands and advisory and consultative capacity, as well as obviously doing execution, one of the things I know a lot of people struggle with is what data is useful to influence like our testing strategy versus what's just noise. There's so much data that you can look at. How do you structure this when you work with a client? So I think this would be useful for brands who are trying to work out their own way of deciphering the data internally. Is where do you start? What data sets do you look at? How do you know when something's useful versus when something's irrelevant?
Yeah, you're right in that there's definitely variation between brands. But typically when we start a new engagement with a client, we'll do like some level of auditing. And that is a mixture of, firstly, we're starting in GA4 or Shopify, depending on where the client kind of keeps their data. And really at that stage, we're just looking to kind of set the scene. We just want to understand, what does the typical e-commerce funnel look like? What are the key landing pages that users are being driven to? Which pages are underperforming versus others? We might go into even device level. So, how does it look on an iPhone 14 versus in Safari versus a Samsung Galaxy in Chrome? You often find like little nuances there because like development across the board you can miss these things. So you might find some quick stuff there, but typically we're using that data to just guide us. So understand what the landscape looks like from a numbers point of view. And then we'll go into more qualitative research. So we tend to utilize, at the moment, we're using Clarity across quite a few different clients because it's free. For those who don't know Clarity, most people know Hotjar. So I always reference it's a bit like Hotjar. So it's essentially a user behavioral analytics tool. So you've got heat maps, session recordings. You can set up funnel analytics within there as well. And I think it's quite a nice visual way of seeing how people are interacting with your site. So if we've gone into the data and let's say we found a PDP that's really high prominence, lots of people landing on that PDP. Let's go and understand how people are actually interacting with it. Let's look at some heat maps first. How far are people scrolling? How much of the content are they actually seeing? And then go a little bit further. Which elements on that page are people interacting with? Are loads of people clicking the size guide? Okay, well, that starts to tell us that there's potentially an issue around sizing or the messaging around sizing. So then we can start to formulate test ideas, start to build up that roadmap of tests. So that process from what the landscape looks like from a data point of view to how users are actually behaving and interacting with the site to then ideation and design of tests comes next. So that's kind of like the general process we go through. We kind of spend a bit more time up front when we first onboard people to build out that roadmap of test ideas. But I think most of the value comes from the test results themselves, because you're purposefully making a change and then you're seeing how users interact with that change. If it made a difference, okay, why did it make a difference? And then you start to learn something a bit deeper about your particular audience set. So as you start doing more testing, the test results becomes more valuable than anything that you're kind of gathering at GA sort of passively. So I feel like that's why like we create this cycle we want it to be ongoing forever. Obviously, we talked about that compounding value earlier as well, but that's why that cycle exists, because each time you run something, you learn something a bit more. That then tells you something else, which goes back into research, and then you kind of continue on that flywheel.
Do you know what I'm going to come back to? Because testing, documentation, and intelligence sharing is really important. So I want to come back to that because that's an area I see a lot of gaps in businesses where people do cool tests but then forget about it. But before I do that, I've got a question that I always ask when I'm working with anyone in testing, whether it's brand side, agency, client, vendor, is evolution from tactical to strategic tests. And I think a lot of things we talked about, and this is my own terminology, so like a tactical, which is really important. So that's things like content changes on a homepage, or it's the example you gave, Anya, about returns information being put into like basket or checkout, what impact that has and conversion. The bit that I think is really interesting, more challenging, is strategic testing. So a user journey, for example, where it's not just singularized elements, it's multiple working together, or pricing strategy, bits which can have if done wrong, can fundamentally screw the business, but if done well, can have a massive material impact on revenue and margin. I'd love to hear like what role does strategic testing have here, and how do you go about planning and executing that? Because it is more challenging to implement and manage.
Yeah, it is. And I think it comes back to where a brand sits on that maturity scale of like, are we just getting started, or have we been doing this for years? Are we comfortable? Because in order to execute those strategic tests, you're going to have input from lots of different people, lots of different stakeholders. So that collaboration needs to exist. Everybody needs to kind of understand the value of experimentation. And without that, things that could potentially go wrong. Piece of data maybe is missing. Somebody's strategic direction isn't right. Like, you need that collaboration. So I think the further you are along that journey, the more likely it is that you can start to test these bigger, more strategic issues. And I think you mentioned like price testing. So Anya, I know we've talked about this with a mutual client of ours. I think they're going to run some price testing in the US. Be interesting and I'm not passing the buck completely. I will continue to answer, but I just want to know from your side, like how does that price testing kind of look? Like how when we get into the executions of that, like what factors do we need to make sure that are all there, and how do we report on it?
Yeah. So it's a great question. I think that there are a few elements around price testing. So there is testing the actual prices of the products, right? And there is things like shipping threshold testing, right? Yeah. Now, and sometimes it's also a combination of both, right? So what will happen, right, if we'll increase this and decrease that? So we do need to make sure that we have a clear hypothesis around that, right? And when it comes to reporting, and I think that's a really critical aspect, we need to make sure that the reporting supports not only kind of the way that we're used to in, let's say regular testing, which is kind of variant 1 versus variant 2. We also need to analyze within that variant, that subset of products that we influenced, right? What actually happened to their conversion rate, to their AOV, right? So that granular reporting that belongs specifically to price A/B tests is critical in order to actually create the right conclusions out of tests. So that's one important angle around that.
Yeah, and I think that it kind of ties in again to that. You started to touch on it, James, before about the documentation. I feel like if you are just running, people call it spaghetti testing. If you're just like running tests left and right, you're not really learning from it, you're not documenting it in a robust way, it becomes really difficult to do anything strategic, because you should be documenting every test result that you've got, learning from that, and then publishing and sharing that. So we use Airtable to basically do a lot of this and create some nice customer-facing dashboards so that you don't have to trawl through a spreadsheet to try and find what you tested on the homepage 12 months ago. Like you can see it really quickly and it all joins together. And I think that in itself becomes a strategic document to help you understand what actually moves the needle when we test it. So we'll even tag our tests based on like UX principles or something that we're trying to influence. So are we trying to motivate users to take action? Are we trying to improve usability? Are we trying to increase the attention on some particular element? And because we tag all of those different things, we also tag the devices, the audiences, all of that stuff kind of becomes like a nice matrix of, okay, we can see of all the tests that we've run, 60% of them were designed to increase motivation for mobile users on the PDP. And when we did that, of those 60%, 80% of them were saw a significant uplift in conversion. So we know when we take that step back, we can see that strategic landscape of what your audience responds to and what you should do more and what you should do less of. And that documentation becomes like your kind of strategy Bible, and it becomes a better view of your digital experience as a whole, because you can see what influences work and what don't when you change them for your actual users.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned tagging, because that's such a critical thing, like a taxonomy for like test results, to be able to categorize it and know. Because I remember a client who stored loads and loads of information. I think it was in like a SharePoint, and none of it was categorized. So you had to trawl through every single test to find out what related to a PDP or what was testing a price or an engagement, whatever it was, and it was just unusable. Yeah, the being clear up front on how you structure that is really, really important. Question for you on that then, Nick, because you can have these amazing repositories and then nobody uses them.
Yeah.
So what is in your experience, how do you get client teams to use the documentation and to learn from these repositories? Because a lot of effort goes into creating them, but they've got to use them to make them meaningful.
Yeah, and I know I keep coming back to it, but it does kind of depend on where they sit on that scale again. You know, if you're just getting started and you're an ecom manager, you've got 100 other things to worry about, you know, trading day to day, all of that stuff that you may not have the time or bandwidth to be able to do it. But as your experimentation expertise and team grows and you start to bring dedicated roles into that, then it's just putting ownership on those people. So as an external resource, every time I'm on client calls, every time we're doing, you know, QBRs or anything like that, I've got the dashboard up, I've got the repository up. So I'm constantly reminding them, this is here, this is here, this is here. And I think over time, where the resource becomes available, people should start to use it. I've definitely been in the boat where I've created all of this stuff and it's just, you know, sitting on a shelf gathering dust. But it's something I'm constantly referring back to whenever I'm sort of communicating any test result with a client, you know, individual test level. I'm always saying, right, you know, we tagged this up with this, that, and the other. This is where it sits in the library. This is the learning section. So, yeah, I'm just trying to, it's kind of repetition, I suppose, and just drumming it into people to come back to it, because it should be a really useful resource outside of just the optimization and econ team, right? It could be valuable for marketing teams when they're starting their new campaigns. Like if we did something on a PDP that people resonated with, well, why not run that as an ad or something? Yeah. You know, so it should be shared and it should be collaborative. But oftentimes it does kind of get stuck with that one person. So
it's a really good point, actually. They sanitize it to wider teams, especially when you're doing like copy tests and tone, like anything that's changed your tone, change your copy style or visual. So Anya, one thing I really wanted to talk about as well was that, you know, you've built a tool, you've integrated to Shopify, and one of the great advantages in the SaaS world is third-party tech being pre-integrated at a data level, so that you don't have these convoluted technical integrations. But the converse to that, where a lot of people get nervous as store owners, especially the technical store owners, is the impact on performance, the impact on theme performance, the impact on page speed, and how you can have trade-offs. So how has Visually been architected technically so that it doesn't have like a big impact on page load through onerous scripts?
Yeah, great question. So having been brand side at the beginning of my career, or most of my career, I used to suffer from that tremendously. And one thing that we did basically before we even started building Visually as an experimentation platform, we actually solved the part of the architecture to make sure that we are loading as quickly as possible. And we did that in several ways. One is, so basically a lot of the even very large experience or experimentation platforms, what they do is basically that they serve all the different tests or personalizations that are configured to all of the users upon loading. What we do in Visually is that we only serve the right experience at the right time to the right user, and therefore we save a lot of loading. So that's kind of one thing. The other thing that everything you build on Visually on front end is served with Preact, which is currently the fastest way to load on front end. And I think at the end of the day, the proof is in the pudding, right? So, and that's a little bit on the commercial side. So back in the day, when we used to integrate to a platform, we had to commit to a year or even 2 years, right? We had to actually devote around 3 months of development resources in order to integrate, right? And then only in a few months, we were able to see if everything that we were told was actually true, right? Nowadays, with Visually, we don't have any annual commitments. We don't even have monthly commitments. So basically, you can integrate, you have a free trial, and then you can actually see how it works and if it impacts the site speed. And if it does, then by all means, please remove us, uninstall, and you will never hear about it again. But if it works, it can continue working. So honestly, as someone who has been on the brand side, I know that whatever I'll say won't mean as much as, what they can actually test and see for themselves.
Yeah, and it is one of the clear advantages of pre-connected ecosystems is that you can pilot and run something very quickly at low overhead and validate whether or not it is right. The danger with that is people install loads and loads of things all at the same time and then don't know which one's having a negative impact on performance. So it's always like urge of caution to test them properly.
Yeah. The other thing that I would mention is that at the end of the day, consolidation is a big part of increasing speed, and Visually definitely helps with that. So basically with Visually consolidate A/B testing, merchandising, personalization all in one, and post-purchase upsells. So that also kind of contributes to a more hygienic, way of running your Shopify brand.
Yeah, and I know a few businesses I'm working with who are really keen to exploit the post-purchase piece much smarter. We'll probably find that quite interesting. Do you have any examples of some really smart post-purchase tests and that have been run that have had positive impacts?
Great question. So one thing that we've seen, I don't know if it's very smart, but it's very straightforward, is for men's apparel brands. We've seen offering kind of the same, t-shirt or trousers in a different color, right? With a slight discount, really does the trick. One other thing we've seen working really well is kind of a surprise me upsell, and that actually goes a long way to clearing out stocks that you might actually want to get rid of in kind of a bulk way, where you kind of create a bundle and you brand it in an interesting way. I was actually very surprised that caught, but that was an interesting one. Yeah, a lot of things that really surprised me is the fact that the same product in different variation work really well as an additional upsell.
And I think this is the beauty of testing is we all have preconceptions, we all have conscious and unconscious biases, and we all have learnings from working with lots of different businesses. But learnings have to be challenged, and sometimes what works for 3 or 4 brands doesn't work the same for another. And if we make those assumptions, it's dangerous path. So I really like this. I mean, I love it when something I know works well, I get proven doesn't on a site, because it's great, because then that site's doing something better than it would otherwise have done. So let's put our crystal ball piece, because I'm intrigued. Yeah, you guys obviously have lots of knowledge in this area, where you're seeing this evolving. So Nick, I'll start with you and then we'll come back to you, Anya. Where are you seeing optimization, I'm going to call it, rather than CRO, where are you seeing this headed from how clients are approaching it, and where are you seeing the role of AI coming into this and how that will develop in the future?
Yeah, I think on the AI piece, I think at the moment there's a couple of different areas where we're using it. So we're using it to help us with customer feedback, and once you've gathered a load of surveys or you're getting one of mine reviews or anything like that, using AI for that to just summarize and put things into themes for you is saving loads of man hours sort of diving into different reports. So I think from a research point of view, it's helping to highlight some of the key areas that we should dig into. And then on the testing side, I think Anya will come onto something in a minute, so I won't go on too long about it. But I do think that there's going to be, I'm starting to use AI to build more complex tests myself. So rather than me needing to rely on a team of developers to build a potentially complex feature on a site, I've built tests using AI. And I think that because we know it's an MVP, it's only going to be live for a couple of weeks. It doesn't need to be, perfectly robust code. It can just live temporarily and work for me in the testing tool. So from a technical standpoint, I do see it kind of helping maybe users who don't have additional development resources, helping them to be able to do more with the tools that they've got available. And I think in terms of optimization in general and where it's going, I think people are at such different stages. And I'm always surprised when I speak to, I think Anya mentioned it at the beginning of the podcast, like some people who have these massive brands who you would just assume have got these huge teams behind them running all of this stuff. Like, they really don't. And I think there's still this level of everybody kind of getting on board with testing first, and it becoming part of the ecom/marketing team standard set of people that you hire. Everybody knows you're going to have a paid person, an SEO person, a trading person, etc. But the optimization thing still feels auxiliary. It feels like something that you might dip in and out of. And I don't think it's, especially in e-commerce, I don't think it's a standard practice across these teams. So I'm hoping that will continue to build traction and develop. And then I think for those who are already doing it and are, ahead of the game, I think that they'll just start to explore more personalization because of AI making it kind of available to us. I think understanding how users are interacting in real time is going to change as well. So at the moment, Anya touched on it earlier, we know if somebody's shown an affinity to women's wear, we can start to tailor content in that way. That requires input at the moment from a human. I think that there's potential for tools to build in something that's predictive. So understand how my user journey is working and start to build and tailor my user experience around that, but test it. So I think there's a few different things, but I think it's kind of carrying on as we are, but introducing AI to make things a little bit smarter and easier to manage.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And Anya, from the technologist, the vendor perspective, where do you see this headed from a platform capability point of view or an integration point? Where, what can people expect coming in terms of features?
Yeah. I think from kind of an overarching perspective, I think AI will be kind of the one that is executing, meaning things like, building the variants, analyzing, right? Building segments, as Nick mentioned. That will require much less human involvement than before. And that will actually leave much more time and room for humans to own the strategy, to get more and more creative, to understand not only kind of what is happening, but the why that Nick is always kind of trying to get to, but it takes time, right? And also to prioritize from a strategic and a business standpoint. At the end of the day, everything we're doing in experimentation is about growing the business, is about understanding the customers, and what leads us is basically the business priorities, right? If the business is telling us, okay, we need to decrease returns, or we need to increase sales, but in this new category, right? That's what we optimize, and that's what we try to grow. So I think that it's an interesting time, and as I said earlier, I think personalization will become more and more granular as our ability to execute in a larger scale will evolve. And we are very, very excited to be part of this movement, and launching our first agentic layer in just a few weeks, specifically around building. A lot of the times what we've seen is that, the issue is not around what to test. People have lots of ideas. but how to test, right? To not get stuck in these development cycles. It's really amazing to see how that technology works.
Yeah, the agentic side I'm generally interested in because I think there's a lot of hype around it, but beyond the hype, there are some really practical use cases where enabling people to interact with tools to query, question, and build like prompts that help them drive automated actions is going to make life a lot simpler for people to execute. I could carry on talking on this topic for hours. I love it. I find it fascinating. And you both have a wealth of knowledge, but I'm not going to use up your entire day. But I guess if people want to learn more about what each of you do, there'll be contact details on the landing page on our website for anyone listening. But let's start with you, Anya. What's the best way for someone to reach out if they're on Shopify, the interest is piqued and thinking, oh, I want to probe more on how visually would work for us?
Yeah. So they can reach out on our site. And of course, I'm also on LinkedIn. They want to see more on how visually works. We have a lot of content there. Love to show them around.
Fantastic. And Nick, what's the best way to reach you? I know people can go to the Vervaunt website in general, but if they wanted to drill into CRO and specific challenges for their business.
Yeah, same as Anya. If you can catch me on LinkedIn, I'm trying to post a little bit more frequently and try and add some value. So feel free to follow me there. Definitely follow Anya, everybody. She posts some real stuff. Or email me, nick@vervaunt.com, and let's have a chat.
Fantastic. Look, both, thanks so much. Really enjoyed this. And I look forward to seeing the story evolve with both visually and obviously the CRO function that you've built out, Nick.
Cheers, James. Been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
You're listening to the Inside Commerce podcast hosted by experienced consultants James Gerd and Paul Rogers. Inside Commerce is your fast track to digital knowledge, featuring interviews with leading e-commerce retailers, industry thought leaders, and the C-suite of key tech companies to explore the latest in digital strategy, customer experience, and tech. Discover what the latest trends really mean and get practical advice based on experience to help fine-tune your e-commerce strategy and tech stack. Follow us on LinkedIn and reach out to James or Paul if you'd like to discuss an e-commerce project. We hope you enjoy the latest episode.